Good evening, everybody. So, tonight we're going to talk about placer gold traps and another kind of angle and the importance I keep harping on, which is bedrock and why. Why is going to bedrock so important? Let me kind of give you a few tips on cleaning out bedrock. But, ultimately, here's a tip for you. Try to get yourself a handful of these really handy, let me zoom in a bit here. Nope, wrong thing. By the way, tonight's show is brought to you by 2020 Prospecting. See that sourdoughminer.com link down below. And the reason is that all of this has to do with placer gold and water moving gold. So that's kind of the theme for the night again. And 2020 is kind of how to get that gold vision, looking at water flow and understanding the importance of water flow and things like gold traps and how they get made. It doesn't cover gold traps. That's another thing. I'll be bringing that up later, but it does cover the water flow mechanisms and how gold concentrates. Let me shift gears here. So get a closer view here. So these are gold vials, and you should get yourself a handful of these for sampling. The reason, and I bring it up in several of my discussions, but in the 5 stages, you remember where we're doing gold sampling? This is one thing you're going to want to do is collect a sample and then mark it, so that it has information on it, in the white label there, that describes where it came from, the date, and that kind of stuff. So you have a notation, a simple number and a map point and a date will do. But the idea is that you're going to build yourself a document that allows you to recover from where you left off, or to back up if you've gone the wrong way too long and lost track of where you had the gold, you were finding it and now it's gone. Very good prospectors, many of them have done exactly that, and you should practice it. Essentially keep yourself a journal of what you're finding and keep yourself some sample vials and collect them, so that you can look at the differences or distinguish the differences between the different samples. You can see it right here, okay? This one right here is kind of interesting. The one in the middle, it's kind of cloudy. That's actually part of the sample. It's deteriorating with time because of some of the minerals that came out with the gold. The gold is fairly dirty, meaning it has a lot of oxides and sulfides that are still oxidizing and sulfiding, and so it makes the water kind of cruddy. You can see the difference between it and say this one right here, where you look at the two in terms of the clarity. Let's see if I can put it up against my shirt or something. Kind of hard to show. So you see the distinctive difference between the cloudiness of this one and the clarity of this one. Huge difference. I can move up real close to the camera, but the problem is it's not going to focus very well. Let me see if I can focus on it better. So when we look closely at the one, you can make out the distinction of that cloudiness and the clarity of the other gold. Let me try to get real close here. I'm reaching way across. I'm going to break something, like me. See the distinction? And that's really important to note that in your book. Note the kind of sulfides you're pulling out. This actually may end up being a more important sample than this one, but we'll get into that a little later. That has to do with the kind of sulfides and the kind of other hematites, etc., that might be coming out. I've got one down below. It's brilliant crimson red. It's clear black, when you pull it out, and then it's crimson kind of red. Here's another good one. And so you get a kind of a feel for what you're capturing from a given location, as long as you keep good notes and you keep your samples separated. When you start mixing them all together, that's when all things break loose and it becomes problematic. Also, that crystal that's in there, pretty nice stuff, okay? Gemstone, okay? You want to kind of keep an eye on those things and keep them in the samples with the other stuff, or at least note it so that you can separate it out from the other samples. Enough of that show and tell stuff. Let's go back to what we were talking about just now. Focus, focus. Okay, so that was a little note on how to track samples and how to keep track of what you're doing. Why would you want to do that? Well, because I hear myself, so it's good. Okay, so for right now, everybody says it's good. I'm going to turn down the volume because that's going to mess things up. Now, let's go on to the topic of the night. So, we started off with this picture here. Actually, it was this picture. And talking about gold traps and bedrock. And I wanted to flip over to this other picture. So this is a shot you've seen me bring out before. This is bedrock. This is slate in this particular case. And I want you to take note of the slate itself, because buried in there you can see these long linear cracks running the length of the bedrock. Well, that all is great and fine, and those form great placer traps, but you've got to be able to get to them. And then if you have equipment, you know, one, if you have a dredge, that's great. If you don't have a dredge, if you have a vacuum, that's great because it's dry. Or if you have some kind of high banker and maybe a hose that you can shoot through there. But one way or the other, you want to be able to get the material out of those cracks, including using a little scraper that they call, you know, a gold crevicing tool. Snipers use it. It's a fancy word for somebody who's going down in and picking the gold out of the cracks. Now, why would you do that? Well, let me explain. So we're going to go to our blackboard for tonight, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a kind of interesting aspect here. We're going to paint in gold tonight just for fun. No, we're not. We're going to paint in blue. So let's say we're looking at our riverbed on its side, and this is the material that's bedrock. Okay, and we've talked about this before. Now, in the bedrock might be like you saw in that other picture with the you know, material going in from a, you know, basically the traps that are formed from slate or from other materials that have fractures. Greenstones like serpentine will have all kinds of fractures in it. So let's say we've got these fractures that are kind of running, you know, perpendicular to the water flow. Water flow is going down this way. Now, in high water, this thing's just booking through here like this. And what we're doing is looking at the fact that in the water, when it goes high water, you know, and flows like it has been, it's still not going to likely peel off everything that's on the bottom. There's still overburden in here. This overburden might have, and here's a little funny note, it might have gold in it. Probably does. How much gold? Well, it's probably going to have some pickers. I'll draw those like this. Okay. And it might even have a nugget or two trapped down on bedrock. But here's the funny part. Remember these little traps in here? You can run into situations where a couple of feet of crack, because it's been trapping for centuries, might have more gold in it. Just a couple of feet of crack and an 1/8 inch wide or so. Very narrow crack, but it's running several feet long. If you can scrape it out or scoop it out or vacuum it out, this little crack, let me change colors again. I'm going to go red this time. This little guy right here and combined with this little guy. But let's just say one of these cracks can have more gold than several yards of overburden material. 1 foot or 2 of a crack that is concentrating gold inside bedrock can have more gold trapped in that crack because of the way the crack concentrates and pushes the silica back out when the gold gets hammered into it, can end up with more gold inside this than all of this region from here to here, you know, yards and yards, which can be many feet by many feet deep. Okay, and you're going to have to go through all the processing of that material. Whereas the trick is, if you had gone down into the bedrock zone and found that crack, you can easily, you know, basically you want to make darn sure you clean it all out, which means you spend time either sucking with a vacuum, you know, some kind of hydro hose or a pick or any kind of tool can get down in those cracks and open them up, because they tend to be packed. There's lots of gold and it's concentrated. So you either go through lots of yards of material, it's sand and gravel and boulders and cobbles, which you'll probably have to do anyway, by the way. But once you get down to bedrock, the opportunities can focus very quickly if you start finding cracks like I showed in this other picture, where we have this bedrock material. Come on. That guy. Okay, and so right in these zones right here, you start looking for these cracks concentrating gold, which are going to be, in this case, they're above the overburden, but you see this whole zone over here. This section right in here is not above overburden, it's being buried by overburden, and that goes on downstream quite a few yards. All right, so you're going to want to remove that material and get to the cracks below that section and look for gold. Why? Because it's lower than the ones up here, but all of them can trap gold, but the lower ones tend to trap it more, and that's another issue with gold and traps at bedrock, and I'll talk about that right now. So now we have we talked about a river and all that good stuff. Let's go back to river colors. So here we are, river's running like crazy. And we have our bottom of the river with the overburden, and then our bedrock down below. And so as we are dealing with this overburden stuff, another point that I want to point out is you can get situations where you have the bedrock, or rather the bedrock is below your overburden, typically, not unusual, and it starts to trap out material, heavy material. Well, that creates these little pockets below the boulders, and in the front and the back of the boulders. The pockets may have some gold. Here's a tip. I say may, and that's important. But they'll typically have a lot more gold if they're down on bedrock. If they're up here, there might be a little hint of gold, but not much, and it'll be fine stuff. Most of what you're going to find in the areas that I marked in red is going to be black sands. Indicators that there's heavy stuff moving down the channel, but the point is, the gold, I'm going to draw this big arrow, wants to go downhill, downstream to bedrock. And so you're going to find most of the gold concentrated in these ones, and again in these cracks. So that's the other reason I push going to bedrock, and I just want to bring that up tonight as kind of the big emphasis for the night. I was thinking about this the other day when I talked about go to bedrock, and the idea was then the whole sample column, but there's another reason. The gold wants to go to bedrock, and not only that, it wants to go bury itself in the bedrock, and so much so that it will concentrate at a much higher level down there than it will in this whole column between bedrock and the lower surface of the water, and not lower surface, the bottom of the water channel. So remember, we got this water moving down here, and it's basically filling up this area in here, and it is not carrying any gold, obviously, because it's all moving down, unless of course it's flying, but even then it's going to be trying to go downhill. They call it saltation. It'll bounce down the stream bed, and it won't go very high because it's dense, and that's another point. And so let's see, Rapid City, South Dakota, checking in. I'm checking on you guys and see if there are any questions that have come up from tonight's placer gold and bedrock traps. Everybody's good. We got Gary Eversalt's on, Ricky Holmes, Justin Saunders, Peter Conway, Charles is here. Hey Charles, good to see you again. And we got Lori Jean from New York. Awesome. James Paul says it sounds good. That's good. Still good. And Jacob Conrad from Southern Indiana. And Arlen Bruce from Rapid City, South Dakota. We just talked about you guys last night. So that's awesome. Check out the video. It's on Hunting for Gold page. And it's also just been posted to, or it will be posted tomorrow morning. It hasn't been posted yet. We'll go live on YouTube on Prospector Guest channel. Check it out. And like I said, this stuff mostly relates to the 2020, this thing right here, sourdoughminer.com 2020 report. Check it out at that link. It describes water flow and kind of what's going on in this huge thing. This was Oroville Dam a few years back, cutting loose and going downstream, but this is the kind of thing you're looking at here. Describes the kind of conditions that move lots of gold, which this did, by the way. Ripped it right out of this whole area over in here was booking with gold right on down into the river below, and so it became a bit problematic, both in terms of the workers, but also downstream, this stuff piled up so densely, salted out and buried the gold down in the river below that they couldn't fire the hydropower stations because the water level had risen. Hydropower stations' efficiency and operations depend on the water levels. They have to be just right because the exhaust has to be at the right pressure or it starts cavitation, which will totally destroy a hydropower station. The blades will just get ruined. If it backs up too high, there's too much pressure, then it can't generate power. So it's sort of this balance. It has to be just right, and it was really bad. So they turned it off. And to get it back on, they had to go in there and suck out all that material and, of course, run some dredges and stuff. If I was there, there'd be a lot of gold recovered, which there was, but not by me. So anyway, I just thought I'd drop you this little tip about the gold and so forth on the bottom and what we're looking for in these placer gold traps. It's important, and I'm trying to help you find more gold. That's what we're here for. Prospector Jess, sourdoughminer.com, huntingforgold.com, and all that good stuff. So good to see you guys. John Coles here's from Idaho. Hi, John. And Bob Sheasley's back from North Carolina. Slate belt running right through. And so that's important to keep those slates in mind. Like I said, these guys are oh, I still am having trouble picking the right picture. These slates are important for that kind of trap, and they are a regular occurrence in many of the areas that have gold for a very simple reason. Many of the gold is intrusive in nature initially, and also comes from the uplifting and the erosion of mountains that are metamorphic in nature. And slate is a metamorphic byproduct, slate and shale. So shale is the sedimentary version of a welded shale becomes a slate. So that's that for tonight. And it can have lots of gold in it. And it can also trap gold. So it can have two, it's a win-win. So you also want to, in an area where you might have slate that has, you know, some sulfides and pyrites and gold buried in them, you also want to check that too, but that's a different story. Hey, Joseph Bren's here from Washington State. Steve Conley's here. Hi, Jess. He says, Steve from Bakersfield. Is it a good idea just to pass on searching on really smooth bedrock, or should we always go all over the bedrock? What I do is I look for this kind of characteristic that you see in this picture. Like I said, these cracks tell me a story. If I see that in the bedrock, whether it's slate or granite or greenstone, I start looking more in detail in the bedrock. If the bedrock's polished smooth as silk, the likelihood of finding gold there is almost zero. Now that doesn't mean it's zero, because there can always be an exception. There can be a little, you know, I would say it can be a funny little fissure like this little crack right here, and it could be chock full of gold, because anytime it can go, the gold can go to the bottom and then fall out and push other material out of the pocket of that flow over that smooth stone, it will trap out. If it's trapping out well, it will just continually concentrate over the centuries. If it doesn't trap so well, then over the centuries, it'll eventually push the gold and it'll keep going downstream. And there might be a little gold in there, but not much. It's always worth checking. It's kind of like I tell people when they're going detecting, dig all targets. That's how you learn where the gold is, but also it turns out in many cases targets that people thought were iron in detecting have gold. You know, maybe there's a piece of iron next to the gold, but it's, you know, it's kind of can be a foolish thing just to think that everything's iron. It's same problem with this. There can be cracks and they can trap, so just check them out. And so that's kind of my tips for the night. I threw a whole bunch of them out there. That was a good one, Steve. Great question. So in general, you're looking at smooth bedrock. The probability drops immensely that there's going to be gold there, but it doesn't go to zero. Never goes quite to zero if there's any cracks. If there aren't cracks, it's going to be really close to zero. If not, well, it's going to be zero. It's not worth going after. If there's sand on top of that smooth stuff, the sand, remember, is in suspension and settles back out. So the only thing you'd find in that sand typically is flour gold and black sands. You're not going to find much else because it's already too light to stay put. And anything that's heavy is going to have, you know, trapped out earlier, or it's going to be in a different area, just entirely. Okay? And so Steve says, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so we got that. But, you know, oh, and potholes. I'll cover that another night. Potholes, another subject, because they have their own property when it comes to hydrodynamics and how water moves water and particles to make the pothole in the first place can also affect how gold concentrates or does not. But I won't go into that. That's a teaser for the next time. Good topic for, maybe I'll cover that tomorrow night. Would you like that? Potholes and gold? So Barbara says, do you ever do hands-on seminars at any particular place that you feel there might be called? Barbara from Michigan. I have done hands-on on a small scale, but I have not done hands-on with you guys, and I am very interested in knowing what you think of the possibility and what you would want to learn and what you'd want to, you know, see. What would make it worth your while to, one, you get to travel there, two, it's going to cost us some money to set that up and do it. And so it's a really big question about, you know, is there enough of interest that we can arrange such a thing? Because I have the ability to arrange it. Yes, I definitely got that. So good question. Put it in the comments below. Tell me what you think about having a hands-on expertise training from Prospector Jess over a couple of days in the field, and whether you would find that to be a cool thing you'd want to do soon. Okay, Peter Curry says yes. Steve Conley says yeah. Yes, potholes would be great. Okay, we'll look at potholes tomorrow night. There, you got it. Heads up. Wow, that's the first time I've ever given you a hint ahead. That'd spoil you. So that would be good. We'll do potholes tomorrow night. But also let me know if you're interested. That's a good question, Barbara. I have that asked from time to time, and it seems to be coming up more and more recently, and I'm looking into ways of putting together just such a program. But I need some input from you guys about what would make it attractive to you enough that we, you know, we'll do this. Okay. Good. Got a handful. So when you say yes, that would be good, I'd like you to say below, yes, I would be interested in group instruction, and then we'll talk about what that means, and maybe some topics or the way you'd like the group instruction to take place. The most likely location will be in the Sierra Nevada. That's a place that I frequent enough that I have some arrangements, and I'll leave it at that. Okay. Won't necessarily be in the mountains, but be in the foothills. Good stuff. Sounds great, people says. Yes, potholes. So we got potholes, we got groups, potholes, groups. Okay, guys, so that's it for tonight. Prospector Jess, over and out. I just thought I'd touch on placer gold traps, another angle for where gold hangs out, and bedrock and how that all ties together. We'll see you next time. Good prospecting and good night. And let me know what you think down below in the comments.